Good morning, colleagues. It's now 8:02, and so we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Nice to see you all. Hope you all had a nice holiday. We have just one item today, and then I have a few updates, and see if Commissioner Robbins, if you have any updates on the current board or vacancy list. So, first is a resolution approving City Commission's appointment of Michelle Story to the Stormwater Oversight Commission. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
And I'll support that. This is Commissioner Perdue's appointment. Ms. Story is a longtime resident of the Second Ward that is very committed to the environment, does work in state government, and I think will bring a really strong approach and knowledge to the Stormwater Oversight Commission. And I believe this will also fulfill the full board. Great. Any other comments? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
No opposition. Nobody's abstained. It carries. Thank you. So that is the little bit of business that we have today. Commissioner Robbins, I don't know if you have any updates on any of the boards or commissions. We did do a fairly large overview last time we met because we had a little break.
I do have a couple quick updates here. I know Commissioner O'Connor's cab appointment should be coming through. His PIF should be coming through at any moment now.
Okay.
His name is Doug Mileski. He's a local attorney. I know that was something the mayor was talking about, was having a couple individuals with a legal background on that body. She recently had appointed Dean Pacific, who's a longtime First Ward resident and community advocate. So excited to have a connection of his too, potentially coming our way. And then kind of one of my projects for the next few months is just making sure I have a good understanding of the upcoming openings on these various boards, and then just kind of finding individuals preemptively to have them submit PIFs and just go through the vetting process if they're ready in case we need them. So I've got a couple of those already in the works as well.
Great. Thank you for that update. I did talk to the mayor about planning commission, so that was probably one of the bigger ones that we had. I also might have somebody who's interested in the BZA, even though we don't have an opening. We know that sometimes that is a hard one to fill as well. We talked about CAB. Housing Appeals Board continues to be a priority, and I know Daniel did send the PIS. We also, thank you, Daniel, has continued to send sort of the new PIS that we get every week, and anyone who we're appointing or who's on our agenda in our packet the Friday before the meeting, so thank you for that. And then probably the other ones that I'll continue to highlight is our Parks and Rec Advisory Board. I think we're doing okay there. Again, we have different boards. Some are, have like true governance or different pieces that they might need to take up. Last time we met, we talked about some of the proposed ordinance changes as it related to urban agriculture. But some of these are more advisory in nature, so might not have something that is so time bound, but certainly want to make sure we have a representative voice on all of those bodies. I think, as I mentioned before, most of our CIAs are doing well. Again, these are mayoral appointments, but certainly look to business owners in a certain area or certain district. I know, for example, for the West Side Corridor, we've certainly had people who applied, and also that Corridor Improvement Authority, much like many others, wants to have a representative of all different neighborhoods. And so I think we're lacking in a Stockbridge area individual. I know Commissioner O'Connor and I have talked about that as well. So with all that being said, I think our priorities will continue to be planning, which the mayor is working on, our Housing Appeals Board, Parks and Rec, and then that is, and probably Vital Streets, just because we did have a change there at the end of last year. We now have 2 openings, and so when I see Mr. Berkman today, I'll try to grab him as well, because we had sort of a pool of individuals who are representative when that millage vote first came on. So, hearing no other business, I think, Can we have an update? Sorry, I'm not trying to stretch this meeting, but Mr. called me about some of the year-end appointment stuff. I know you talked about that maybe 2 meetings ago, so just a quick update about how that process is going. I know I'll turn over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I hope they had a lovely holiday weekend. Yes, the packets for the end-of-year appointments will be provided at the end of the day today. They are the packets of those current members whose terms are appointing, less those who are term limited. I believe there are just a few of those cases in this instance. However, those packets will include those individuals, whether they have yet reapplied or not. That'll provide you some insight as to whether or not you would like to reappoint these individuals. I'll also provide anyone in the vetting process for those boards and commissions so that if they're somewhere blocked in the process, hopefully by the time November or December rolls around, we can get those applicants in good standing and appointed at the end of the year.
Okay, great, thank you. And just a reminder to anybody who might be watching, we certainly get a number of PIFs in. I think that is not necessarily always the challenge. There are definitely dynamics of ward or city, non-city resident, specific expertise that maybe might be looking for, whether it be a legal or, in Ms. Story's case, an understanding of stormwater management. So, I think we get a number in. It's really sort of fine-tuning it to get to the specific seat, and also just encourage people and remind people that any PIFs that they do, they stay on record for a year, but beyond that, it would need to be recompleted. So, and then of course we're doing that with the reappointment process. And even if someone is served, it's not necessarily that they will continue in that service. There could be a variety of reasons, attendance, other experiences, and things like that. So, all right. I think that should be all of our updates for today, colleagues. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn us now. Thanks. 8:08.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to call our fiscal committee meeting to order here at 8:30. Commissioner Perdue is going to be absent today, so Commissioner Yasasi and I will hold it down. Our first item on the agenda this morning is a resolution authorizing $50,000 in support of the recommendations of the SAFE Task Force through a pitch and highlight night.
So moved.
Support. It's been moved and supported. We'll turn to Mr. Kane. Good morning, sir.
Thank you, Commissioners. So this is a pitch and highlight night. We've done several of these in the past. This is an opportunity for the community and nonprofits to help us understand what opportunities there might be to decrease violence in our community. So these opportunities allow those different organizations and individuals to take that next step, and would welcome your support in this particular item. I can answer any questions if you have them.
Very good. Questions? All right. Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Item 2 is a resolution authorizing a contract extension with Home Repair Services of Kent County for low-income refuse collection program in the amount of $45,021.
So moved.
Support. Moved and supported. Mr. Gorney, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Commissioners. As noted, this would allow us to extend the contract, an existing contract that expired at the end of 2022. We currently have about 800 customers throughout the city that are on the low-income program. Unfortunately, both parties overlooked the contract, and so we're just looking to extend for the rest of this calendar year, with the intent of rebidding at the end of the year.
Very good. Questions?
Just, can you repeat the number? You said how many are in the program? You said 800?
We have a little over 800
Okay,
customers.
I didn't know if you said 800 or 8,000, so
No,
thanks.
800.
Thank you.
All right. No further questions. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Item 3 is a resolution accepting a grant award from the Recycling Partnership and the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy in the amount of $100,000.
So moved.
Moved and supported. Mr. Gordon?
Good morning again. So we're excited about this program. We have two other agencies that are not listed in the memo. So the Kent County Department of Public Works, they're partnering with us, and then also the Grand Rapids Housing Commission. We hope to establish a baseline when we get started with this program of contaminants or contaminated materials at multifamily complexes. Ultimately, we need to offer the service that is currently not available at these places. At the conclusion of the program, we'll measure our success with the hope of continuing the program and expanding to other multifamily complexes.
Very good.
I just have one clarifying question. Mr. Gorney, for the multi-family households, will that first start with the Grand Rapids Housing Commission and then a baseline, and then you would go further out?
Yes, that is correct. They're helping us to get established I think there are about 8 locations that we're going to start with.
Great, thank you.
All right, with no further questions, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Item 4, resolution authorizing City of Grand Rapids to enter into an agreement extension with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and the Kent County Community Action Agency to continue participation in and accepting funding for the Low-Income Household Water Assistance Program.
So moved.
Support. Mr. Jernberg, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Commissioners. What you have in front of you today is essentially a 6-month extension. The LIWAP program is a federal program where money is distributed to the states, and then in the state, the Department of Health and Human Services administers the program. There's still money available, and DHHS has reached out to those that have been utilizing the program and asked if we would be willing in extending our agreement with KCAA, and we are. So at this point, this gives us another 6 months to be able to tap into the low income as a supplement to what we already use in our own process, which is our individual circuit breaker program from penalty fees.
Very good. Questions? All right, hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, sir. Item 5 is a bid list resolution for September 5, 2023.
So moved.
Support. This morning, Ms. Claire.
Good morning. We have 11 items this morning. They include equipment purchases, painting services. We also have the continuation of the sidewalk snowplow project. Sorry, that was a lot of letters. But if you have any questions for me or the departments, we're here to answer.
Very good. I guess if Mr. Hurt back there, I could ask him a couple questions about the snowplow thing again? Or Mr. Gorney, one or the other.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad we're continuing this. I appreciate the fact that the city continues to invest in this operation. Just a couple of questions, I guess, again, just for the public, just so they understand. What's same area as last year? What streets are being covered? And then what is the threshold at which the snow gets, these folks get called into action here?
Yep, so the threshold is 2 inches, so 2 inches or more, they get called into action. The area was expanded this year, so we bumped it up to 200 miles.
Okay.
And so some of that was to not only to loop, but create connections throughout the city.
Great. I appreciate that. Just wanted to make sure that's out there. I think that's important for people to know. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 6, our warrant report, 8/9/23 through 8/22/2023. Mr. Comptroller.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the period reference there, the city released cash payments totaling $166.4 million. That includes approximately $5.7 million for employee payroll expense and just over $411,000 for income tax warrants. In terms of quantity, 910 income tax refunds were issued and 1,086 checks and electronic payments were made. And the details on the following pages show information for all the payments greater than $20,000.
Very good. Question? All right. With that report will be received and filed. And final item on our agenda this morning is our Treasurer's Report, August 4, 2023 through August 22, 2023. Mr. Treasurer.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm going to start out with the good news. If we look at the bottom of our report, we have $602 million in the bank right now. A chunk of that still is going to be money we still have to distribute to the local taxing authorities. We were at $743 million, but it was kind of nice to walk over a $45 million check to the county and deliver a $54 million check to the schools. They're thrilled because they get their funding right as their schools are opening and when they need it. Our portfolio is earning 2.76%. Our challenges coming up right now, that I foresee right now, is we need more information. We need more information in regards to large projects the city is embarking on. We still are looking for items about the amphitheater and the structure, a soccer stadium and a structure, and how that's going to impact the city's debt and our city finances. Because right now, we're going to be in a situation where we don't know how long we're going to need to invest our monies or when you're going to need it. And so, there hasn't been much information that's come out yet as to the details of that, as to what the overall impact is going to be to the city. Are we going to see income taxes increase? Are we going to see property taxes increase? What is going to be the challenge that we're going to have with the general fund and the city as a whole? Because as I look at it, I'm imagining what I experienced in Detroit when you have something at the hockey arena and Ford Field and the baseball stadium. I would imagine you need more city services available should an event occur in those locations, whether it's police and fire response. What is that impact going to be long-term on the city? I mean, we're talking about that's not just going to be those stadiums growing, but we're talking about all the buildings and other items that are going to grow around that. And so, when we look at our portfolio and we're trying to plan our expenditures out 5, 6, 7, 10 years, we need some more transparency. We need to see these numbers sooner. So I'm sure that Grand Action and the Convention and Arena Authority have done an impact statement within Kent County and West Michigan, but is it available to drive down to how that's going to impact the city or the county? Because, there's a lot of interactive parts that have to work together. And so when we look at the money that we're getting for tax collection and property tax collection, and we're plotting that out of when we can have the best use of it and when we can put it to work for us right now at the interest rates that are there, we need more information. And so that's our challenge right now is as those things unfold, we need that data. And so, we're sitting on $40 million right now in ready money that we would like to be able to actively push out. And we're working the best we can with Ms. Claren and her team. But, we still aren't seeing clear numbers as to what we should expect as an organization. And that's our challenge right now. So yes, it's ready money earning 5%, but we'd like to make sure that we've got it structured as such that it's ready to be used when you need it. And so that's our challenge that we're heading into. We think that the rates are going to pause in September. There's the likelihood of it increasing as a small chance, but more than likely, if we continue to have mixed data, we see another 25% increase probably in the November meeting. But it's still not topped out yet. The Fed's still talking about we're going to be hawkish. We're going to be prepared to raise that rate again if we're not seeing the results we expect. And so, I think that's the struggle we're all in right now is that we're getting mixed results and that crystal ball isn't very clear.
Good. Questions, colleagues? All right. With that report will be received and filed. And with that, we will adjourn fiscal at 8:41. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. Welcome to our City Commission meeting, or our Community Development Committee meeting, I should say, on this September 5th. Hope everyone had a lovely holiday weekend. We'll start today. We have a full agenda for CD. So we'll get started today with the resolution approving a fireworks discharge permit for Event 1FX for an indoor special events at Van Andel Arena in connection with the All Elite Wrestling Tour. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
And support? Moved and supported. All right. You want to tell us about this one, Ted?
Well, it's a new wrestling group is all I know, but they're going to be doing a lot of pyro, and it's mostly going to be on the stage, not around the arena or around the ring like WWE likes to do, so it should be a whole lot better.
All right. And that's on September 23rd. Commissioner, any questions? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving an agreement with MDOT for a congestion mitigation and air quality grant for the Traffic Management Operations Center with a total cost of $660,000. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right, and supported. Let's see.
It's me.
Oh, that's Mr.
Yes, it is
Naramore. All right.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioner. This is an annual allotment that we do to manage the Arterial Traffic Management Center. So for those of you who don't know, we don't just do the city of Grand Rapids, we also do the majority of Kent County as well as portions of Ottawa County. This grant helps us fund a lot of that work and the maintenance behind that, and then we bill our customer communities for that. Total grant from Michigan Department of Transportation is $528,000, and the local match is programmed in our operating budget, but because we're on the federal fiscal year, we budget it in both the fiscal year 24 as well as we will include it in the fiscal year 25, so we have to straddle 2 fiscal years.
Great, thank you. Are you hearing that feedback?
Yep.
Yeah, maybe Travis can do something.
Oh, no.
Oh, is it that one? Thank you. Great, thank you. Any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, it carries. All right, next is a resolution approving an agreement with City of Grand Rapids and MDOT and authorizing expenditures of $300,000 in connection with the Metropolitan Traffic Signal Optimization Project.
So moved.
And support, moved and supported. Is this you again, Josh?
This is
Mr.
also
Naramore?
me.
All right.
I think you're hearing the feedback from this microphone, so I'll make it quick.
All right.
So this is
Or Josh, why don't you want to come here by Joel?
Well, we can just do this one and see if it'll work.
You don't want to move closer to city clerk?
No,
No
so
offense.
This is also an annual project that we do for retiming the region's traffic signals. So we have an included intersection list of 67 intersections across the region that we'll be retiming this year. The local match actually comes from the Vital Streets program.
Yeah, thanks. And remind me, I know we do this every year. So over the course of a year, or over the course of several months, the traffic lights, they seem to be adjusted or the timing seems off. Is that because of power outages or emergency vehicles? Is it a number of factors that play into that?
There's a lot of factors, and if there ever is an issue that anybody notifies, if you please let us know. Sometimes we're adjusting signal plans. We do probably the most adjustment on Michigan Street. We do that in partnership with Corwell Health and a number of the businesses across that street, just because there's a lot of dynamic changes. But when you're driving around, you may notice it. If a fire truck, we have a system that works with them in order to keep green time longer for them to be able to respond better to calls. But if any constituent ever notices any issues, please call it in and we'll take a look at it. But we're always trying to adjust them, and we can do most of it remotely through the Traffic Management Center in the previous grant that you just approved.
Good, great, good to know. All right, any questions?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, is this one just the city limits or is this also region?
It's regional.
All right. Any other questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, next that will take us to our fourth item. This is a resolution approving a cost-sharing agreement with Corwell Health for reconstruction and water main in Leffingwell Avenue from Bradford to just south of Leonard Street, and Bradford from Leffingwell to East Beltline. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
And support, moved and supported. Mr. Berkman, our city engineer, you want to tell us about this?
Yes, good morning, Mayor and Commissioner. Thank you. This also pertains to the next item that's on your agenda regarding a major amendment to the planned redevelopment district that's connected to Corewell Health's project there on Bradford, the construction of a cardiovascular ambulatory surgery center. This item in particular will fulfill deferred street improvements that were referenced in prior zoning approvals pertaining to this property. The work will include full street improvements on a portion of Leffingwell south of Leonard and on Bradford west of East Beltline, and it will include curb and gutter, drainage facilities, a sidewalk or shared use path, street lighting, and trees. The development also requires the installation of a new water main within the project limits to complete a water main loop that will serve the facility. And per the terms of the cost-sharing agreement, Corewell will be responsible for that water main as well as the full street improvements and sidewalk or shared use path and lighting, with the city being responsible for milling and resurfacing about a quarter mile of Bradford just west of East Beltline. So our share is estimated to be about $450,000 of that $3.85 million total project cost, with our share coming from the Vital Streets Fund. And I know Mr. Vanderzand, Corewell's Director of Facilities, Planning and Design, as well as Corewell's Legal Counsel, Mr. Meyer, are here today in support of this item, and just want to acknowledge their participation in coming to this agreement and thank them for their efforts on it as well.
All right, thank you. Good to have you here. Commissioner, any questions? All right, we're glad to see Corewell here in our city growing, both out on the Beltline and downtown. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution setting September 19th as the date to consider a major amendment to a planned redevelopment district located at 2984 Bradford Street Northeast. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
And support. Moved and supported. We'll turn to our planning director, Ms. Turkelson, to tell us about this. Where are you?
Good morning. I am right here. So good morning. Mr. Berkman covered some of this, but the actual plan itself, this was included in an old planned redevelopment district that was established in 1993. Clearly, the needs have evolved or changed, and today Corewell is looking to construct a cardiovascular ambulatory surgical center at that location. There are a number of considerations that the Planning Commission worked through, including proximity of wetlands. They also found the site plan to be appropriate. There was a condition of approval that did speak to Mr. Berkman's item specifically about looking to continue a good faith effort to move forward with the road reconstruction. So that's why these items are viewed as a companion.
Great, thanks. Commissioner, any question?
Just out of curiosity, do they have a tentative date for when they're going to be operational at that facility?
I'd probably look to Rodney for that answer.
Yeah, thanks. So anticipated start date is as soon as we get approvals, we'll submit for a demo permit. There's currently a house on the site, so we'll start there. And then anticipated completion is roughly January-ish of 2025.
Great. All right, any other questions? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution setting September 19th as the date to consider a conditional rezoning agreement to facilitate the construction and operation of an urgent care clinic at 1935 Breton Road Southeast. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
And support. Moved and supported. Turn it back to Ms. Turkelson.
Yes, thank you. So the west side of Breton is currently zoned neighborhood office service, and that's really, when you think of it, is exactly that, neighborhood-oriented office services. So medical uses are permitted. However, the intensity or scale of an urgent care or a clinic were not contemplated as part of the NOS district, again, likely due to the intensity of the uses that you typically find with an urgent care or any sort of medical clinic, but we've seen uses evolve, and I think the nature of urgent cares has changed. And so the Planning Commission had that as part of their consideration to facilitate the request. We worked together with the applicant to consider a contract rezoning agreement. We didn't think it was appropriate to rezone either a single parcel or multiple parcels on the west side of Breton, simply because the intensity of the uses that are allowed in that zone district we didn't think would be appropriate. There's some adjacency to residential, and it also is predominantly office uses on that side of the street. So we decided that a contract rezoning agreement to facilitate the request was most appropriate. Planning Commission did deliberate the merits of that and ultimately recommended support of the conditional rezoning agreement. You'll note as part of the conditions really focusing on the scale and intensity of the neighborhood office service district, but making sure that the proposed use itself could be facilitated with this agreement.
Great, thank you. Commissioner, any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution setting September 19th. We're going to have a very busy day on the September 19th, as we can tell, to consider rezoning of 1058 Butterworth Street Southwest to the TNLDR Zone District. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
And support. So I should clarify that's traditional neighborhood, low-density residential. Ms. Turkelson, you want to tell us about this?
Yeah, I think the number of rezonings and conversations we're having is pretty indicative that the plans have evolved and changed, and hence the need for a community master plan update as well as a rezoning when we start to see us utilizing these tools to facilitate plans that we would otherwise support. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, that's a great observation.
Yeah. So this is a parcel that was previously zoned industrial transportation. It is substandard in terms of its size and really would have a difficult time being utilized as an industrial zone district, which is probably indicative of its underutilization currently. So lots of conversations about this generally, this area of the city, I should say generally. I'll also note that Butterworth Street we're looking to do an area-specific plan as part of the master plan update, because we recognize that there are very quickly, the land use patterns change very quickly. And this is an example of that because immediately west is in a heavy industrial use. But this particular request is to rezone to traditional neighborhood, low-density residential, which would then facilitate a residential development that the applicant intends to propose. And the parcel size is far more conducive to that scale of development and that use itself. Planning Commission did consider the request on August 10th and ultimately voted unanimously to recommend approval to the City Commission.
Great, thank you. Commissioner, any question? This is your ward.
Yeah, it sure is. What's the intended use of the parcel? Is it going to be a single-family home or like a small apartment complex?
Yeah, oh my goodness. Coming off a holiday. Low-density multifamily.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any additional questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving an increase of $100,000 for south elevator at the Government Center ramp for a total not to exceed just over $1.5 million. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
And supported. Mr. Berkman, you want to tell us about this item?
Yes, so construction on the elevator here at the Government Center ramp is progressing well, with an anticipated completion date around the end of this year. However, the project has encountered a few unforeseen challenges that have utilized all of the project contingency. A couple of those include encountering 5 feet of bedrock that we had to remove. And I'm told broke 4 jackhammer attachments in the process, but a drain line that also had to be removed containing asbestos, and adjusting for slight grade variations where the elevator door openings meet the actual floors. And so we're asking for your approval of this increase of $100,000 to give us additional project contingency to allow the project to proceed forward should we need to address any additional issues that arise. The good news is that Mobile GR has already submitted a budget amendment for this amount to be transferred from the Ottawa Fulton elevator modernization project, where we realized a significant savings. So seeking your approval of this increase.
All right, thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Nairmore, for being proactive. Any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving an increase of $24,000 for structural improvements to LaGrave Fire Station. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support. Moved and supported. Mr. Berkman, you want to tell us about this?
Yes, a contract was awarded in June of last year to make structural repairs to some failed beams and also infill the area way over at the LaGrave Fire Station. The contingency was utilized to cover another number of unforeseen items in this project, including some additional concrete and masonry repair work, replacement of a failed sump pump, additional steel supports, some steve valves, pumps, and trap replacement, and additional insulation. However, one additional item still needs to be addressed, and that is to install a steam vent through the roof, with the original one having been vented to the basement, which is not in compliance with current code. And so with the infill of the areaway, there was not sufficient space for this to vent. So this is a fix that will allow for it to go through the roof and for the system to be functional this winter. So asking for your approval of this increase of $24,100 coming from the Capital Improvement Fund Facilities Management line item.
All right, thank you. Commissioner, any questions? I suppose I don't necessarily have a question, more of a comment. So I was over at LaGrave, and I see our chief in the back there, and I know that this project is really critical, and that there's a number of structural issues over there, and this will improve that. Of course, I am a little concerned as I see this increase on top of the conversation from our last meeting with overtime being above projected, and then obviously we have fire stations that need to be built, training facility that needs to be built. So, we're only a couple months into this year's fiscal plan and budget, and so thinking about the fire department as a whole, seeing continued increases come forward is a little concerning, that we're going to be well over budget of what this commission just approved less than 3.5 months ago. So that's just a word of caution I have from seeing a number of fire department items come before this body, and I'll have a conversation with our city manager about that as well. But like I said, I'm going to support this because I know it's needed, but it is concerning to me as I see these items for the fire department continue to come forward. So, Commissioner, any final comments or questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, it carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving a construction agreement in the amount of $45,000 for an encroachment agreement for Trinity Health street improvements, and these will take place on Jefferson. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Moved and I support, so moved and supported. Mr. Berkman, you want to tell us about this?
Yes, so Trinity Health is seeking to install median islands, new crosswalks, landscaping, and irrigation along their frontage of Jefferson Avenue between Wealthy and Cherry. Seeking your approval of this construction agreement, which per the terms includes a deposit of $45,000 in escrow to cover our costs associated with plan reviews, inspection, and administration in carrying out the project. And then the encroachment agreement under this resolution allows for the maintenance of the landscaping and the irrigation system to be handled by Trinity Health. The funding for this project is being provided by the Downtown Development Authority, and asking your approval of this resolution.
All right. Commissioner, any questions or comments?
Yeah, can you just remind me, this stretch of Jefferson, is it a replacement of the current median islands, or is this an installation of something entirely new?
The median islands are entirely new. There was a project done on Jefferson like 2013 or so timeframe, but this is installing medians just to create some streetscaping enhancements, create some breakups for protected pedestrian crosswalks and things of that nature.
Thank you.
And they've been working pretty closely with Josh's department and the DDA for quite some time, looking at safety over in that area. All right, any other questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, it carries. All right, next is a resolution approving a construction agreement and accepting a public utilities easement for Meadow Springs RPUD Phase 3.
So moved.
Support. Moved and supported. Back to you, Mr. Berkman.
Thank you. So this will serve a 23-unit single-family development located in Walker with water and sanitary sewer. The project's located south of 3 Mile and east of Kinney Avenue. So seeking your approval of the construction agreement and acceptance of the necessary utilities easement associated with this phase of the development.
All right. Thank you for that. Commissioner, any questions? We're glad to see housing in our neighboring communities. We know that that's needed all over our region, so happy to support this. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, it carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution scheduling a public hearing for October 10th to consider a brownfield plan amendment for River North project, which is located at 1340 Monroe North Avenue, a really exciting project there in the 2nd Ward. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right, moved and supported. Mr. Gracia, you want to tell us about this?
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. So this is a resolution setting that October 10th at 2 p.m. as the date for the public hearing for this project. Again, this project is located at 1340 Monroe, and again, it's a new construction of a 226,500 square foot building with a little over 1,800 square feet of commercial space, which will result in this first phase, 260 apartments and a integrated parking structure with about a little over 440 spaces. Expected construction cost is a little over $75 million, and this particular public hearing is to support a little over $21.5 million of brownfield eligible activities, and construction is expected to start yet this year.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so we'd have a public hearing on October 10th, and then it would be back before us. Commissioner, any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, it carries. All right, and then a companion item, a resolution scheduling a public hearing the same day on October 10th to consider the establishment of a neighborhood enterprise zone for the same project, a River North project at 1340 Monroe Avenue Northwest.
So moved.
All right, and I'll support. Moved and supported. Mr. Gracia, anything to add on this item?
Nope, just pointing out, it's just for a 15-year neighborhood enterprise zone exemption certificate.
Great, thank you. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, it carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution scheduling a public hearing for September 19th to consider a brownfield plan amendment for Factory Yards. This is for their transformational brownfield project at 565, 573, 640, 655, 835, and 943 Godfrey Avenue Southwest, along with 700 MLK Street Southeast and 615, 620, and 644 Chestnut Street Southwest. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Moved and supported. Another great project in our community, major project over on Godfrey that's been talked about for years. So, Mr. Gracia, you want to tell us about this?
Yes, Mayor, to help summarize all those addresses you had to read, I'll just say this project is encompassing 15 and a half acres off Godfrey Avenue. Again, will result in 467 units of housing, of which 10% will be restricted for households earning 60% AMI and another 10% restricted for earning 80% AMI. Total development costs are about $147 million. They will also include a 825 surface parking spaces, I should say, and construction yet again, hopefully to start yet this year as well.
Great. We are very excited for this project. And remind me, process-wise, once it gets through our body, is there still an approval at the state level?
There is, yeah. So we're shooting for October for the MSF approval.
Okay, good. That was my follow-up question. When do we anticipate it'll be on their board agenda? All right. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, it carries. Two items that are related to this, a resolution scheduling a public hearing for the same date, September 19th, to consider an obsolete property rehabilitation district for Factory Yards. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
And supported. Anything to add, Mr. Gracia?
No additional information.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, it carries. And then the last item related to Factory Yards, resolution is scheduling a public hearing the same date, September 19th, which, by the way, is a commission night out in the First Ward, So it's, I think, timely that we're having it there to consider an application for a 12-year obsolete property rehabilitation exemption certificate for factory yards. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
And supported, moved and supported. Mr. Gracia, anything to add?
No additional information.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? It carries. All right, and our last item before us today, a resolution rescinding and replacing proceeding number 92829 to change the location of the September 19th public hearing for the federal fiscal year 2022 consolidated annual performance and evaluation report and future needs of housing and community development grants. Can I get
So moved.
and supported. So, Commissioner, this is on our Committee of the Whole agenda for a briefing. So we'll be getting a briefing from Ms. Bohatch on our caper. But this, again, is just to change the location for the scheduled public hearing that is mandated as a part of this process. Ms. Bohatch, anything to add?
No, you did it beautifully. Yeah,
Sorry.
we came in August 8th. It was approved for the September 19th, and the location changed. So this is just to clean it up.
Yeah, thank you. Technical issue.
Yep.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Commissioner, any questions for Ms. Bohatch? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? It carries. All right, that will take us to the end of our Community Development Committee meeting, and we'll be back in here in about 20 minutes for Committee of the Whole. right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole on this lovely September 5th morning. Commissioners, we have a few action items before us, and then two briefings. We have a briefing on the Butterworth landfill solar opportunities, and then a briefing on the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, as we so call CAPER. But before we get started today, I want to take this moment. There's Miss Sierra. Right, where's Sierra? There you are. To do a proclamation for Welcoming Week. So I'll come down here. Yeah, I was going to say, come on, whole team. I see y'all in the audience. We're all here. They're the ones that do all the hard work. That's not true. Well, it is. So I fortunately get to serve with these incredible people who are doing the hard work of making sure that our community is a welcoming and inclusive place for everyone. So I'd like to kick off today by establishing Welcoming Week for September 8th and 17th, and then I'll turn it over to Sierra Atkins to say a few words. And then if you would like, we can get a picture. City Manager, is that what you would like to do? Yeah. Picture afterwards? Okay. So this proclamation reads, whereas the success of Grand Rapids depends on making sure that all Grand Rapidians are welcome. New Grand Rapidians are a vital part of our community, along with our longtime residents who bring ideas, businesses, serve in civic roles, and contribute to the vibrancy of our community. Whereas the City of Grand Rapids values diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in January of 2019, the City of Grand Rapids, in collaboration with the immigrant community and organizational partners, and with support of Gateways for Growth, a collaboration on New American Economy and Welcoming America, embarked on a journey to co-create a welcoming plan for our community. And I really want to give a huge shout out to the county for being a leader in this space as well. Whereas to fully embrace diversity as an asset, our community must create policies and a culture that ensures everyone belongs and thrives. This includes addressing disparities, countering hate, understanding our history, and helping neighbors come together. And whereas our community has faced and often upheld systems and policies that discriminate against residents who are born in another country, are Black, Indigenous, and or LGBTQIA+, to name but a few, communities who face oppressive practices. While those most directly impacted are residents who are discriminated against, all of our residents are adversely impacted by anti-Blackness, racism, xenophobia, and all forms of othering that threaten our collective well-being, our health, and prosperity. Whereas the City of Grand Rapids serves on the Welcome Plan Steering Committee and has worked to build stronger and more authentic relationships with our local immigrant and refugee communities through the formation of the African American and Refugee Advisory Task Force, Know Your Rights training, ongoing engagement with the Congolese community, and an increase in sponsorship for immigrant-led celebrations that foster belonging. And whereas through Welcoming Week 2023, organizations and communities bring together neighbors of all backgrounds to build strong connections and affirm the importance of welcoming and inclusive places in achieving collective prosperity for everyone. Now, therefore, I, Rosalind Bliss, Mayor of our great city of Grand Rapids, do hereby proclaim September 8th through the 17th as Welcoming Week. And I call upon our residents and stakeholders of Grand Rapids and beyond to join together to build stronger communities and relationships with all of our neighbors, renewing our commitment to our common values and take actions in the spirit of welcoming. Signed by myself. Thank you so much. There you go. You're welcome. Thank you for your work. You want to say a few words?
Sure. Awkward. Okay, we would really just like to thank city leadership for supporting and allocating resources for us to do this work. We know that it's been taking place for many years before my tenure in the office, and we hope to continue to see all of the great things that we can do together when we come together for Welcoming Week. And we really want to make sure that this wonderful city is a place where all of us are welcomed and thrive.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. All right. You want to come over here? Yeah. You all want to be a part of it?
Stand in the back. I was say you can stand in the middle.
Stand in the back. In the back. Oh, you're welcome. All right. Good? All right. You see me? Oh, yeah, here we go. I'm too tall. I have to stand in the back. Good way to kick off the day. All right, next, that will take us to our 3 action items. And Commissioners, these are all to set public hearings. So the first one is a resolution setting September 19th as a date for a public hearing, and October 10th as the date to consider an ordinance to amend Chapter 156 titled Animals of Title 9 of the Code of the City of Grand Rapids. Can I get a motion?
Support?
All right, moved and supported. Commissioners, any questions or comments about this item? Commissioner O'Connor? No? No? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next will be a resolution providing for the publication and scheduling September 19th as a date for a public hearing and October 10th as a date to consider an ordinance amendment to Section 9.63 of Article 5 of Chapter 151, which is our nuisance ordinance for the Code of the City of Grand Rapids. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right, moved and supported. Commissioners, any questions about this item? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, and next will be a resolution providing for the publication and scheduling again September 19th. It's going to be a very busy day on the 19th for all of us because we also scheduled a number of public hearings at our CD. But this is to schedule a public hearing again on the 19th and then back at us on October 10th to consider an ordinance amendment to Section 9.857.155 of Chapter 170, Municipal Civil Infractions. And this is Title 9 of the Code of the City of Grand Rapids. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support. All right, moved and supported. Commissioners, any additional questions about this item? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, well, with 7 minutes in, that takes us through our action items. And it'll take us to 2 important updates that we have before us today. The very first one is a Butterworth landfill solar update. So we have Ms. Sutter here. She did provide a memo, and we have a PowerPoint. I know many of us are familiar with this project. And so we'll turn it over to Mr. Matthews and Ms. Allison Sutter to tell us about this item.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just here to do a quick introduction. Ms. Sutter's the one that's been doing the preponderance of the work on this over the last few years, but did want to set the stage a little bit for where we're at. Been here about 4.5 years. This has been a conversation since I've been here. I know, the mayor will testify. It's been a point of conversation long before that. One of the things when I got more involved with the project that I noticed that there's a real rush to get solar on the site, but not a lot of discussion about what it is that the city wanted to see out of the project. Specifically, what were the benefits that we wanted to see, given that it was our site and we were likely to have probably a not insignificant capital investment in order to see it happen. So over the last couple of years, most of those conversations have taken place directly with Consumers Energy to identify opportunities on the site. Became pretty clear that the alternatives that we had at that time were going to be incredibly expensive for the city and not really have any substantial benefit for the community when it comes to either affordability or our own greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So we've taken some time to take a step back, pause the conversations with consumers, and take a new look at the property. That's been enabled to, in some part over the last year with some of the funding structures that were put in place through the federal government. So I just wanted to let you know where it is that we are, what's kind of led us to this day, and Ms. Sutter's going to talk a little bit more about where we stand and what our next steps are for getting solar on the property.
Great.
Ms. Sutter?
All right, Ms. Sutter.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager. And good morning, Commissioners and Mayor, City Manager, and staff. I'm excited to be able to provide to you this overview of the Butterworth landfill. I think many of you know it's a very complicated project that's been going on for some time, so trying to keep it high level, but also share some information and context a little around the history for those that are new, that are commissioners, and potentially for those from the public who may not be aware of all of the historical context with respect to this site. Before I get started, though, I did want to take an opportunity to thank just a few people people who have put in a lot of time to help over the years with this project, and former Deputy City Manager Eric DeLong is somebody who's partnered a long time on this site. Margreta Carney, who was with the Environmental Law and Policy Center, has been a huge advocate and a partner helping us identify some obstacles and how we can navigate those obstacles from a regulatory framework. Mr. Mike Hooker, who is here from our legal department, has been a fantastic partner in our legal department. And then as well as Consumers Energy, who's continued to be a partner and stay at the table with us and trying to identify some innovative ways to really bring this site to fruition. So with that, the primary desired outcome that we have is to successfully deploy solar across the full Butterworth landfill in a way that really fully maximizes social, environmental, and financial benefits locally here in our community. And now we're looking both, and today I'll review with you a short-term strategy as well as a long-term strategy. So a few of the overarching facts with respect to Butterworth landfill that are important to keep in mind. So this is a US EPA Superfund site. It is governed by a legal consent decree that it was entered into between the EPA and the primary responsible parties for the landfill. It's approximately 180 to 190 acres. A variety of different publications will list it at different sizes, but through some of our GIS mapping, we've identified that the city owns 145 of those acres. And the most recent estimates show that of that total site, approximately 60 acres are available for solar development. And I'll review via a map why it's not the full area of that site. The consent decree, the primary remediation that was put in place is a 4-foot clay cap that protects anybody who is at the site from any of the historic landfill material that has been a part of that landfill. That cap cannot be disturbed in any manner. You cannot put light poles on it. You can't put bathrooms on it. You can't install anything that would penetrate into the cap and would, potentially break apart that cap and cause some major problems. There are groundwater monitoring wells as well. Folks ask, it does not produce enough methane for any type of recapture at this site. You'll see on the map the Grand River runs along and is adjacent to the landfill. To the north is the John Ball neighborhood, which is one of our neighborhoods of focus. It has been maintained since that time, primarily just as an open grass area with walking paths along the perimeter. And as you'll see on the map, there is a main access route to the river through the middle of the property. EPA did commission a beneficial reuse assessment that was done in 2013. They identified under all of the legal restrictions with respect to the cap and other remedies that have been put in place that there are 3 primary beneficial reuses at the landfill. And those are leave it as a grass field, turn it into parking, or install solar panels. So this is a map just to put in place. So this does fall on the southwest side of Grand Rapids. Here you can see, again, as I mentioned, that it is adjacent. The river runs along the south side. And this map is from that 2003 reuse assessment, but I think it provides a really good overview and context. So just want to take a little bit of time here to explain what's happening with respect to the landfill if you're not familiar with the site. So to start, you can see around the perimeter, this kind of gray area are the walking paths. And we have heard from local community members that those walking paths are quite used, and it's important to preserve those walking paths. That's also been something that's been included in the parks master plans and strategic planning as well. Down the center here, this large area that is in the hatch is actually owned by a different company. And so that is not a part of the conversations. They've not been interested in the solar conversation, so that's not area for solar development. Down the middle is the access road that goes all the way to the south, all the way to the river, and there have been conversations, and here this kind of square area was a paved area with the hopes of having boat launch access for the river and all of the reimagining and rejuvenation of the river. That is something that is still very important. Historically, it wasn't able to come to fruition because of the lack of being able to get electricity to that site, and so with some of these solar development opportunities, that brings forth kind of a renewed hope there to tie that piece in. When you're looking at the colors on the map, the darker green are areas that are at too much of a grade or slope away from the south, and therefore are not ideal for solar installation. The areas that are in the light green are those that are at a sufficient grade to support solar installation. You can also see that there is some water around the perimeter, and so those areas have been identified as not areas for installation of solar as well. Okay, these are a few pictures, just if you haven't been out there. I would encourage you to check out the walking paths. You can see the aerial picture at the top, and this is the Grand River running here where you can see the trees adjacent to the river, and then the bottom would be if you're standing on the landfill. There is a very large consumer's energy substation that is adjacent to the landfill, and then the very large radio tower that is on that private ownership of the landfill. So thinking about, many of you have been involved in some of the approaches to reuse this landfill over time. One that I wasn't even aware of, that Assistant City Manager identified on the top left here. All the way back into 1971, there was a desire to look at turning the landfill into a football stadium. Some of you may remember conversations that were pretty advanced in terms of making it a rugby complex, but running into some of those issues of bleachers and bathrooms and lighting that would penetrate the cap, and not being able to really identify adequate solutions to bring that to fruition, as well as I'll mention in review, the risks associated with this being a Superfund site. And then through some of the planning efforts that the city's done over time, identifying and imagining some park uses and other ways that Butterworth could be reused. So this is the most recent rendition, again, an aerial view here of the landfill that you can see. And if you look at areas 1, 4, and 5, you can see solar panels have been identified, and this being the prime area for solar installation that amounts to about 16.5 megawatts that could be installed. So a very large array. To put in context, our Lake Michigan filtration plant is 1 megawatt. And this is the approximately 60 acres that have been identified. You can see some pink and red small marks. Those help to identify where those groundwater monitoring wells are and need to be preserved and protected as well. Parcel 2 in the center here with a faint dotted line is very small, and the panels would be placed on a downhill slope away from the south, so that's not very much, that wasn't identified as a prime area for solar installation. And then area 3 here is shadowed by the radio tower and trees that are to the west of that area. So just to remind you what this could look like, these are pictures from our Lake Michigan filtration plant and the ground-mounted solar that takes place there. So you can see an aerial view for what it looks like. And then the picture on the right, if you were standing next to the solar array. These at the site, I believe, stand around 9 feet tall. Now on the Butterworth landfill, they'd have to be ballasted, so that will increase the height, I suspect, by a couple of feet for that structure. So that could be a little taller, but gives you a sense of what it could look like. So to walk you through the timeline, this has been a very long and winding journey, but wanted to key in on some of the major events that have happened. So starting in our top left corner here, the landfill was closed in 1973. That's when operations ceased. And then in 1986 is when the U.S. EPA placed it, and it was on the Superfund National Priorities list. So over that time, consent decrees were being worked through in the legal process. So in 2000 was when the full remediation, that cap, was put in place and finalized under the last consent decree that was entered into in 1999. 2013, I mentioned EPA did the beneficial reuse assessment to understand what the opportunities were there. 2015 and 16, as some of you may recall, and I know Mayor Bliss was very active and on the commission during this time and then becoming mayor, the city did issue an RFP at that time and entered into a contract for a 2 to 3 megawatt array that was intended to serve our water resource recovery facility, which the electricity would have to go over or under the river to supply the wharf. The company ultimately went bankrupt, and so that project did not come to fruition at that time. Between 2018 and 2021, staff myself, I was hired just before that, working with Mayor Bliss on creating the Energy Advisory Committee. We came together with that diverse group of stakeholders across the community, took a step back and evaluated our opportunities citywide on 8 different properties, looking at to the extent we could install solar and what would be the financial circumstances of those solar installations at that time. And Butterworth was included in that evaluation as well. Of course, 2020, the pandemic hit, and so at that time, we really looked at that evaluation and recognized that the Lake Michigan filtration plant was the most promising array and installation at that time. It has an estimated $1.8 million net savings over 25 years. So we spent a good 12 to 18 months focused on getting that solar up and running, which powered up last summer. Late 2021, also spent almost the better part of a year partnering with Consumers Energy on one of the programs that ultimately has to be approved by the Michigan Public Service Commission. It's known as their voluntary green pricing program. And through that anchor tenant program, we were able to work, and you'll see here on our options, to have the ability to work with consumers to deploy solar at the Butterworth site. And that was something that was approved through the MPSC. As Assistant City Manager Matthews mentioned, a big game changer for Butterworth Solar was in 2022 when the federal government came out with the bill and the IRA and, of course, the tax incentives that are now available for municipalities. And then finally on the timeline, just in March of this year, the state Senate and House both came out with bills that were introduced with respect to community solar, and I'll share a little bit about that, but that impacts and provides some opportunities for development at the site as well. So just to reinforce the goals that we have at the city in which the installation of solar at Butterworth could help move and show further progress on these goals. So just last fall, City Manager Washington approved a community-wide goal that is 62.8% greenhouse gas emissions reduction. It's a science-based target. It's community-wide, and that goal is set to be achieved by 2030 and measured against our 2019 baseline. The stretch goal there being the 100% reduction by 2050. So we've had our municipal government operations goals in place for a little bit longer. Our goal with respect to our own government operations is 85% greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2030 from our 2008 baseline. Of course, that's looking at our facilities in which we operate, the utilities, as well as our fleet, and that stretch goal being carbon neutral by 2040. So to put into perspective, though, our municipal emissions only account for 2.2% of total community-wide emissions. It is important for us to lead by example, and that is what we are working to do, but also just want to keep the broader context of the community-wide emissions in mind when thinking about that. Our performance through 2020, some phenomenal performance due to many different departments, was 30% reduction in comparison to that 2008 baseline. And then, of course, our other goal is 100% of the electricity that is consumed by our city buildings, utilities, and fleet to be supplied by renewables by fiscal year 2025. So the performance that we measured in calendar year 2022, we had increased from we had plateaued at around 37% for quite some time, bumped up to 44.4%. That was based on our Lake Michigan filtration plant coming online just about 6 months, and consumers' portfolio has increased with respect to the renewables that they're providing through the grid as well. We do estimate through our modeling that if we're able to achieve 100% renewable electricity, that this should get us to about 80% reduction on our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal. So do want to take a minute here because I know I get a lot of questions from the community as well as to, what's taking so long or why hasn't something been deployed? And there are a significant number of challenges that have been experienced over the last 10 years with respect to the site. And so I want to just high level outline some of those for your awareness and understanding. I'm going to start with Michigan law in the top left. So by law, when you develop solar, something that's called behind the meter, that is where the solar that's generated goes directly into your building and does not go onto the consumer's energy grid. Okay, you have to consume your energy 100% of the time, 24/7, 365. You never have excess electricity that would go back onto the grid. The way that the law is written is when you have solar developed, you have to be supplying a property or a consumption that is on the same site or immediately adjacent, right? You can't build wires that would take you 2 blocks over to serve something else. And so to date, we weren't able to identify any large off-takers that were immediately adjacent to the Butterworth landfill in that scenario. By Michigan law, there's also something called the 1% solar cap. That is where the regulated utilities are required at a minimum floor to accept a 1% what's called distributed generation. And so that means of all the electricity that consumers supplies to customers, 1% of it they're required to allow others to generate, right? Distributed out into communities, whether that's rooftop, Lake Michigan filtration plant, or a proposed Butterworth solar. They hit that cap, which means it was then up to them whether they wanted to accept any more, because by law, it only requires a minimum of 1%. They voluntarily increased that cap to 2%, and then just this year have increased that to 4%. And finally, community solar, which most people define as solar that is owned by the community. That is not something that is currently legislated in the state of Michigan and is prohibited. However, if you remember on the timeline I mentioned, there is a bill that has introduced community solar. Other states have established privately developed community solar as something that has been legislated. We believe right now that that bill will likely see action by this fall, and it does allow for private development of community solar. It caps it at 5 megawatts, which is what other sites have done. But essentially a private developer comes in, develops the solar, and then would work to identify subscribers. It could be households, it could be municipalities, it could be businesses. Anybody essentially who's a consumer's energy electricity customer is able to subscribe to that community solar. So now switching over to Michigan regulations on the top right. Utilities are required to go to the Michigan Public Service Commission to have rates approved. And one of the rates that are approved applies to what is called excess electricity that's generated from a solar array. So when you have a solar array and you cannot use 100% 24/7, 365, right? Take City Hall, for example. If we put solar up here, right, we reduce our energy consumption to be energy efficient on the weekends when we don't have operations. Well, in July, when you have really great sun and you'd have solar generation, we likely would not be able to utilize all of that on-site here in our building, and the excess electricity that we're not using is put back onto consumers' grid. So in that scenario, the utility requests and the commission ultimately approves that credit. What needs to be paid to the entity generating that solar power that's going onto the consumer's grid. And the rate that has been approved is 3 cents per kilowatt hour. Even though solar prices have come down a lot and it's very competitive and more cost effective than coal and others, it's not 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So at that moment, you're essentially subsidizing the generation of electricity back onto the grid. And that has been a very difficult complexity with respect to the cost and financing of a project. Also, as previously mentioned, Consumers Energy has been prohibited from working directly with electric customers on solar projects. And that's to allow for market development and competition when it comes to the solar energy. Just in 2021, they did approve and allow municipalities and educational institutions only the ability to work with Consumers Energy directly, and there's a specific carve-out for the Butterworth landfill, recognizing how complicated of a project it's been over time and the benefit of installing solar on a landfill that's located in an urban core. The EPA Superfund requirements. I reviewed those a little bit, but a few other points to share with you. The Butterworth Site Group is the responsible party under the consent decree, and the Butterworth Site Group ultimately must approve any action that is taken on the site. And they were amenable and did sign off in 2015 when the RFP was moving forward with that. Ballasted solar must be used on the landfill in order to protect the cap. So you can see a picture here that adds substantial structural components and cost to be able to protect the cap. And then finally, building solar on a Superfund site comes with additional risks that are not present in other brownfields, other landfills, or other greenfields. So the city's primary circuit. This is the first time that we have really been looking at exploring a behind-the-meter scenario in which we could take solar generated at Butterworth, directly put it onto our primary circuit. So we've been evaluating the opportunities to do that, and the primary circuit has been identified as a facility that is adjacent to Butterworth because our distribution system does run along the north side of the landfill. So our primary circuit, again, if you're not familiar, is an electricity distribution circuit that we own and operate. And it serves our street lighting, it serves our traffic signals, and about 100 buildings that receive electricity on that system. Unfortunately, most of its use is lighting, and therefore is using the bulk of the electricity, 60 to 70%, overnight. That does not line up with when solar is generating electricity during the middle of the day. And so we looked at utility scale battery systems to essentially be able to store that daytime energy that's being produced and then supply our electricity uses at night. But the utility scale battery storage has been very cost prohibitive historically. Thankfully, those prices are starting to come down. Then we looked at actual physical capacity of our primary circuit. This gets a little beyond my technical expertise, but what I can tell you is that because of the actual size of the primary circuit, it restricts the amount of electricity that can be put onto the circuit. And so that's something where it's really dictating that only what could be generated by a 1 to 2 megawatt array, right? Remember, Butterworth in total could be 16.5 megawatts, but our primary circuit can really only accept the electricity that would be generated by an array the size of 1 to 2 megawatts. And then lastly, I appreciate somebody else coined this, but I think it's a good way to describe it. There is an extension cord, which is infrastructure that we need to build from any solar installed at Butterworth to get to our primary circuit. And that's something historically has been even identified as about a $3 million cost in terms of helping to just transmit the electricity that can be generated at the site and get it onto our primary circuit. So some of the most recent development estimates when we were partnering with Consumers Energy to get into this and better understand the finances. So as I mentioned, it was estimated that the 60 acres could be used to deploy anywhere from 13 to 16 megawatts of solar. This would generate about 27,500 megawatt hours. And the upfront capital expenditure was just shy of $50 million. That is for the full site to be developed, and they included a 7% cost of capital for estimating that cost. Now, please note at the bottom of this slide, these were estimates that were done in the summer of 2022 before the IRA was passed. So the second is we narrowed in and tried to focus in what would be the cost specific to that 1 to 2 megawatt behind the meter, here abbreviated as BTM array that would serve our primary circuit. That was estimated to produce about 1.9 to 3.8 million kilowatt hours annually, would use about 5 to 10 acres, and was expected to increase our renewable performance by 3.8 to 7.5%. So the upfront capital expenditure for that size of an array, including that extension cord infrastructure investment that was estimated at $3 million, would be a total of $9 million. Okay, so now my last few slides, I'm going to review the different strategies that we're looking at. There are 4 strategies, 2 of which are short-term strategies and 2 of which are longer-term strategies for successfully deploying solar at the site. So the first and the highest priority that we are pursuing is behind the meter, abbreviated as BTM. So here you just heard about that, but that's the 1 to 2 megawatts on the 5 to 10 acres that would directly supply our city's primary circuit. So nothing would go onto Consumers Energy grid in this instance. So funding, thank you to the Commission and City Manager Washington for supporting $3 million in our fiscal year 24 budget to help with the infrastructure costs of that extension cord that's needed. We're also pursuing and looking at federal or state funding that could be used. Other potential funding sources might be additional city funding or financing that would be needed for this component. The status of this strategy is that but it's in progress. We are going to be releasing an RFI and an RFQ in early September. So I'm currently working on that. And the intention to start with the RFI and the RFQ is because a lot of solar developers really like to come and pitch that they can install this amazing solar array and save you millions of dollars. And that's what's happened historically with solar developments all across the country. And as you recall, with the challenges, installing solar on a Superfund site, it's very technical, has some additional components. Working in Michigan under our regulatory and our legal framework also has some other areas. So we want to frame through an RFI and an RFQ some questions that will allow developers to let us know, do you have experience working in Michigan? Have you ever worked on a landfill or a brownfield? Have you incorporated battery storage or distributed generation as a part of solar installations that you've worked on? And so working to have an RFI and RFQ that would solicit developers that have experience in those areas, likely host a workshop, and then the goal would be by the end of this year to release an RFP for invited developers that have responded to the RFI and RFQ, with the hopes then that I'd be able to come back for leadership to have recommendations in spring of 2024. So that's the first option and what we are most aggressively pursuing as our highest strategy right now. The second strategy that is also in action right now is what I've defined as community solar in parentheses. So this would be looking at a 12 to 15 megawatt array. So we're reserving the 1 to 2 here for the behind the meter for the city, but then to utilize the remainder of the site to indirectly supply low-income households in disadvantaged communities. And so you generate the electricity on the array, it does go into consumers' energy grid, and then essentially it's a paper transaction that helps identify who are subscribers and who gets credit for the electricity that is generated at the array. So there are some different opportunities. The US EPA came out with a Solar for All funding and grant opportunity. And so we put in our letter of intent for a $60 to $75 million application to fund this project. They just came out on Friday and updated the grant program. And so I'm working through those updates right now. It doesn't necessarily affect our opportunity to pursue solar. They've extended the deadline for the full application from September 26th. So please mark on your slide. I didn't put it in here, but the deadline is actually October the 12th. And so I am working on that application. I'm also working to get clarification. Some components of the grant information indicate that perhaps only a 5 megawatt community solar array is the max allowed. And of course, we would love to deploy anywhere from 12 to 15 that are available, but we may ultimately be restricted to a 5 megawatt array at the site. And so that's in process. The EPA indicated that they anticipate coming out with award notices in March of next year with funding that would be available in July. And it's a 5-year grant program. It does allow for a 1-year planning period if needed. So those are our 2 highest priority short-term strategies. Now transitioning to our longer-term strategies. The third here is titled Anchored Tenant. So this, anywhere up to the full site. If our first 2 options are not successful, we could look to work through Consumers Energy Voluntary Green Pricing Program, that anchor tenant option that I briefly mentioned, that in 2021 was the first time that it provided a pathway for the city to work directly with Consumers Energy to fully build out solar. And through that program, again, essentially any consumer's electricity customer could become a subscriber. The city would be referred to as what is the anchor tenant. And we have the option of being a subscriber from 0 to 100% and anywhere in between. And then we could work with other subscribers, even potentially through their Sunrise program that allows for participation of low-income households through that. So a variety of different options that would be available through that. The funding there, again, pursuing federal or state. Any subscribing organization that wants to participate would also be responsible for some funding, perhaps philanthropic funding for some of the low-income participation, and or if the city would choose choose to participate, city funding or financing. So the status of this potential long-term strategy currently is on hold. We really want to focus on those two short-term strategies that were previously discussed. I do want to note that the EPA has another grant program called the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, and we are working in partnership with Grand Valley Metro Council right now on the planning part. That's phase 1, but phase 2 is funding that is going to be made available for shovel-ready greenhouse gas reduction projects, of which installing solar at Butterworth could be one. And they're anticipating making that application available in April. The final long-term strategy, kind of titled here, is private development, which would be pursuing a similar course of action that was taken in 2015, although making development of the full site up to that 13 to 16 megawatts available through an RFI, RFQ, and RFP process. This development would be done by a private developer. They would work in contract with Consumers Energy. The electricity would have to go from the site to the Consumers Energy grid, and then that private developer would work with others that would be interested in essentially receiving what at that time would be renewable energy credits or a contracted party through a power purchase agreement. So the funding in that scenario would be, on the private solar developer and those that would be participating in contracting via the PPA or a market resale. Of course, still some other funding sources that could be pursued in that scenario. And so the status there is that that is on hold. We really want to allow for the two short-term strategies and even the above anchor tenant long-term strategy to be fully vetted before moving into that fourth option. The last note here, this is just one we wanted to make sure that we were speaking to. We are looking at solar storage or distributed generation in all scenarios. That just expands the ability of any solar generated at the site to maximize that and to have it regardless of whether it would be behind the meter or any of the other opportunities. And so we are continuing to look at integrating on-site battery storage at Butterworth, or in the instance of our behind the meter strategy, looking at whether we could have some distributed battery storage, throughout our primary circuit. And the U.S. Department of Energy has expressed some interest in this area and looking for some pilot projects, so we continue to look for some funding that could be used. And so here, this is something we'll continue to pursue for all of these different options. And so with that, that concludes the presentation that I have, and I would be happy to take any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting to sit here and think back of the last 12, 15 years. I hope Mayor Hartwell's watching this. I'm sure he's not, but I'm sure he will appreciate the update, which I will send him after today. This was really, he launched this project when he was mayor, and I know he's disappointed to see that it hasn't come to fruition yet. So I appreciate this update. I have a couple questions. The first one, going back to what you said initially about some of the challenges, I'm curious, if we had net metering, if we had more of a deregulated utility system in the state, would we be able to move this project forward more quickly? I know I've sat through lots of financial analyses, but is that, I'm just thinking, there's a lot going on in Lansing right now, particularly around renewable energy. I know that there's a community solar bill that's been dropped, or at least they're hoping to see it move forward this fall. I'm curious, is there anything that could happen in Lansing over the next couple months that would help make this project more viable?
I think that, so net metering is one of those areas that gave the ability to the Michigan Public Service Commission to regulate on behalf of utilities. And historically, we had net metering in place, which had more favorable credits when that excess electricity was generated. So in that sense, I do think that it was more beneficial under a net metering scenario that any excess that we might be generating and sending back to the grid would be generating more on a kilowatt hour basis to help offset the cost. That 3 cents per kilowatt right now, which is the approved rate under what is now termed distributed generation, we basically in Michigan move from net metering to distributed generation. And there are other states that still work under the net metering scenario, which I do think, from what I understand, does allow for more reimbursement to those that have built solar on site. With the community solar is an opportunity that could help in that scenario in terms of the question will be, will private developers be able to deploy solar on a Superfund site with ballasted solar at a cost that is more competitive than what Consumers Energy has shared? And so we would only know that if the community solar bill passes and allow for private developers then to be able to competitively pitch what that might work on. But I think outside of that, I think, I don't want to go without saying, even with net metering in place, the other obstacles have been very large. So I don't want it to say just with net metering, that would immediately make a path forward that would be so much more financially viable.
Gotcha. Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah, my question's kind of piggyback and reflects some of that. I guess Butterworth landfill's its own beautiful and unique snowflake, right? Which I think, has a ton of opportunity to do really great things for the city and the community. But as we look at solar as a whole, right, it's not the only site in the city, both that we own as a municipality and potentially others own that could work for solar. And so you're queen for a day and you can just wave your magic wand and make changes. What are the real obstacles to this working in Grand Rapids? Is it the on-site taker requirement? Is it the 1% cap? Is it the 3 cents a kilowatt hour fee? What are the real challenges to, we can navigate Butterworth with other things, but how do I make this viable in Grand Rapids if you could just.
I would say three things. To your point, one is the legal requirement for on-site, that the solar has to go directly on-site or to a property immediately adjacent.
Okay.
Right, there'd still be infrastructure costs getting it somewhere else, but that is a restriction that we have run into. Two, you mentioned the 3% per kilowatt hour, which is the approved distributed generation rate right now.
What would that rate be if it was, if I could, what is it up front of?
Right now, I think,
what's that?
in general, my best estimate for if you have a greenfield solar development, you could probably get it at around 6-7 cents per kilowatt hour, right? So getting somewhere to the point where your credit is going to equal your cost of installation. And again, we have some questions, but cost of installation at Butterworth, I'd have to go back and I'll get you the cost kilowatt hour. But I would say at least 6 cents per kilowatt hour.
I could go look at one of my multiple electric bills, but what am I paying per kilowatt hour?
What are you paying? Residential is typically probably around 9 cents per kilowatt hour is what you're paying.
And what's the business paying that's on the primary?
Businesses, depending, there are different rates. It could be all the way up to 12 cents per kilowatt hour. I will tell you one of the other complexities is that we have a contracted reduced rate for our primary circuit. So our primary circuit, what we're paying is just a little above 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So it helps that we have a reduced rate for what we're paying for electricity. But then in terms of making the case, when you have rates that are closer to the 12, 13 cents, right, you can have real savings by offsetting that. It's harder when ours is 7 cents. And the third option, I would say, is a large influx of capital, because we're still just not going to be able to get around the fact that this is a Superfund site that comes with additional liability risks and structure that has to be included. And so that's why, in particular with the bill and the IRA and Solar for All, those have been game changers. Because before, I do want to also just mention, we've been working, and a big shout out to Ms. Farrick for working. We've put in applications with our federal senators and representatives that have supported funding for this, but ultimately didn't make it through the federal appropriations process.
But Ms. Sutter, going to what Commissioner O'Connor said, outside of Butterworth, ultimately our goal is we want everyone to have easier access to renewable energy. And, there's been a lot of talk about even how it doesn't financially make sense for people to even add solar on their rooftops, even though other states, they're having significant increases in individuals who are putting solar on their rooftops. So as we think, the three barriers that you said, are those also the barriers that you see individual homeowners, individual businesses also having when it comes to adding solar on site?
Yes. The distributed generation rate, I've talked to a number of businesses through our CCAT work that we're doing that have large rooftops and have not been able to make it financially viable here with that rate. approved because oftentimes you have an area such as the landfill or a rooftop where you can put in a beautiful solar array, but the facility is not consuming the amount of electricity that's being generated by that large of an array. So you have that excess electricity that's going back, and anytime you have any kind of significant amount of excess electricity where you're only getting credited 3 cents per kilowatt hour, it's not financially going to make sense. So that is something that I have heard both from businesses but also from residents. I have hesitated in going out and really advocating for residents to put solar on, trying to do some work to identify what might be a minimum array, particularly for low-income households, where they would be using 100% all the time to avoid having this excess electricity. Now, battery storage is another element that helps you capture that and use it at a different time. And so I would say the battery storage costs have been coming down, and if those get to a point that they can help the finances, that would be a fourth component that I would say would help.
Go ahead.
Well, and as you build a capital stack, like this is like any other project, right? And you think about, the economic development tools in your toolbox to be able to try to tackle this, are there any tools that, can brownfield be used for this? I know to be able to, I was talking to a state rep earlier about this. That might be something like we just modified, the state just modified brownfield to be able to use it for housing. Can you use brownfield to do solar or no? Or are there other tools, A, that are available or B, that are missing?
So this will stretch my knowledge area here, but I have worked with, and I know I did a little bit of work with Mr. Klooster, and actually Consumers Energy looked into some brownfield redevelopment credits that could be used. Ultimately, I can't get into the details why, and I'd be happy to go back and get you the details to help explain, but it was identified that those weren't viable opportunities at that time. I know there were just some changes with the brownfield laws, but I think that I don't believe that would help support.
I think there's an appetite potentially from a couple of influential people in Lansing who want to think about modifying some legislation to work on brownfield for solar. I imagine a Superfund site probably could qualify for that.
One thing to note,
We would
just
hope.
if you are having conversations, Superfund site is defined differently than a brownfield, so we just need to make sure it's broad enough that it says brownfield and Superfund site. And Mr. Matthews helped remind me, the cost was around 21 cents per kilowatt hour for the behind the meter back in 2020 when we did that. So again, thinking about the fact that a 3 cent per kilowatt hour credit, if the cost of actually building your solar is 21 cents per kilowatt hour.
It just feels like Consumers doesn't want people to actually do this. They just want to keep controlling the entirety of the market and not let good environmental stewardship happen in local communities.
Well, and that leads me to another question, and I'll turn it to City Manager. Since the storms last week, I've had a number of people reach out to me asking why we don't have a municipal utility, especially looking at the performance outcomes of utilities versus communities where there's a municipal utility, which tends to have fewer outages and they get their power back on more quickly. And I know we talked about that, my goodness, probably at least 7-8 years ago, about the potential. Again, it's a huge undertaking with a lot of expenses, and it would be a challenge, but that's another question that I think as we think about our goals and our community goals, especially once those are solidified, we should be, one, able to answer that question when asked by residents who are saying, why don't we consider this? And then two, really making sure we understand what that would entail if that is ever a path that the city wants to go down, not probably while I'm mayor, since I only have about 16 months left, but it might be something in the future if we're unable to meet our goals based on current regulation and the current regulatory world that we live under in this state. So let's go to City Manager and then Commissioner Isasi.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I really appreciate the discussion. I think a majority of the effort has been focused on Butterworth, knowing that we need to look at solar strategies outside our city-owned property. And I guess with respect today, I want to get good direction on the priorities of the commission, if you're in agreement with at least the two short-term strategies that Ms. Sutter has identified. I think the conversation about how to incentivize more rooftop solar is a very important one. And if we can even put it in more lay terms, in terms of how long does it take on average for people to recuperate the cost of capital to install solar, and what can we do, whatever that period is, 9, 10 years, what can we do to become more in line with other communities to reduce the amount of time it takes to break even, if you will, from the cost for installation, and whatever the different cost is in terms of either consuming or selling back on the grid. I think that, and then there could be multiple ways to reduce that, whether it is increasing the cost of credits from selling back to the grid, or whatever the tax incentives could be for installation, or, as you said, some of the other federal programs that we might get. But I guess that to me, and that's not just a Grand Rapids question, that's a big statewide issue. But I would like to see what is the best practice in terms of rooftop solar panels, because it's happening all in states all across the country at a much more rapid rate. But with respect to Butterworth, I would like to walk away today with, because I've heard different conversations. Why don't we just do what was attempted before and go to the market with potential private development of the entire site again? And that's not what is being put forward here today. And I want to make sure we're really comfortable with the direction that we're proceeding.
All right, and I have a thought on that too. So let me go to Commissioner Sassi, and then Commissioner Robbins, and back to Commissioner O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. And when you say my technical understanding doesn't, you have a lot of technical understanding every time I hear you present. And thank you for putting it in these lay terms for us. I also, too, hope that Commissioner Reppard is watching this, because I know this is something that, he really championed as well. And just thinking back to sort of my first employer, Cascade Engineering, and thinking about how, the full area of sustainability has evolved, and to kind of be here at this point. I think my colleagues made good points about different legislative pieces. I get asked regularly, how is the IRA going to trickle down into individuals? And I think we've asked that with Cara and with Ms. Farrick and other individuals. And Mr. Matthews and I were at an event a couple weeks ago, kind of celebrating it, but I think it still is not quite as tangible to me of how this is going to play out for our residents. So for me, my priorities would be how, I think we can't have everything, because we can't do it all at once. And I think there's some realities about the financial, we just had an update from our city treasurer this morning at Fiscal. There's some real realities about the cost of money, kind of different projects that we've had and the expenses associated with them. And sometimes you're kind of like halfway through a remodel and you just have to keep on going. And I think we're at a point where we have to take into consideration all of the projects that we have. I appreciate the slides that really highlight the different strategies. I think this is really helpful. But I remember being in a meeting with the mayor and Commissioner Reppard, and when you hear something like 50 million, I think shortly after that committee dissolved, because we were kind of at a point where we really, and you as well, didn't need to make a decision. So for me, my priorities would be, what can we do to help support our city operations first and foremost? I think, everything is kind of a step. I agree. I think there were a lot of questions about municipal utilities, about power, about the expenses associated with losing power. Where we have a lot of beautiful trees on the northeast side, we have a lot more residents who experience power outages. And so, really helping to reduce the overall cost for individuals is something that's a priority for me. City Manager, if you asked that question. And then, colleagues, I'm trying to remember, did we also have an update from the Rapid at some point earlier this year about that they were also looking at maybe doing a park ride share out at Butterworth? Was that?
No, there was
what were they?
There was some conversation about adding parking out at Butterworth.
Okay.
To assist with staging as we see the
Got it.
amphitheater and other large-scale projects come online, that there's a growing need for staging, but also potentially employee parking and other things. And parking, when we looked at Butterworth years ago, one of the 3 possible uses is parking. And I think as you look at the overall site, there's still an opportunity to add parking if needed.
Okay.
If we just look at the 3 parcels, that would be appropriate for solar.
Okay. I just wanted to bring that back into the conversation as, individuals might have remembered that piece. Mr. Matthews was coming up because you had a response to that?
Yeah, so I was actually going to bring this up at the end of the conversation, but you've teed it up here. There are other conversations that continue to take place, and that feeds into our decision to do an RFI, RFQ at the beginning before we move forward, because it keeps those possibilities on the table, and we can have conversations with proposers before they actually submit and put something together. So we've continued to have conversations with the CAA about the possibility of solar over parking. We've also been having some interesting conversations with our STEAM district and with Consumers Energy about the possibility of utilizing the STEAM district as part of decarbonizing the large commercial buildings downtown. The RFI, RFQ gives us the opportunity to introduce those into the conversation and get a broad collection of expert feedback on exactly what that might take. But those are the additional community benefits that I talked about at the beginning. We have a unique opportunity with Butterworth because of its size, because of its location, because of its proximity, and the fact that we have our own circuit to really realize some direct community benefits as opposed to theoretical community benefits. When you generate solar and just put it onto the grid, it gets mixed with all the other generation sources, and theoretically, you receive some local benefits. So we've been looking at how do we leverage this site in order to realize real greenhouse gas reductions right here in Grand Rapids, and how do we keep some of those other opportunities in our pocket as part of the conversation.
That's all I had. Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks. Commissioner Robbins and then Commissioner O'Connor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll make it quick, and I am in the same thought pattern too as Commissioner Isasi, is just using this as a means to prioritize making our city operations cheaper in whatever way possible. I was curious, with the $3 million in funding that's already approved for the behind-the-meter strategy, what additional cost beyond that would be required, or does that cover a large percentage of it?
So that's why we wanted to go this route to do and get moving on the RFI, ultimately RFP, to have better cost estimates, because initially it was kind of around 10 million, with 3 million being this infrastructure extension cord. And then we've had some other conversations with some solar developers who, again, I don't think have as deep of knowledge about Butterworth, but indicated that they thought somewhere around that $3 million mark, they may be able to do the extension cord and solar. So with this process, we'll have a much better idea of what the costs could be for that smaller deployment.
Okay, got it. I think in my mind it makes sense to move forward in whatever ways we can. I don't think it has to be like an all or nothing approach, and I would certainly be interested to see the RFPs and RFQs and how maybe to utilize the space for more than just solar, although I'm certainly excited about that opportunity and what it presents. So that was just kind of my one question. Another quick one too, what was the last point of engagement with the organization that's occupying the middle of the property? Or I guess what sort of barriers are they facing, or what's their sentiment towards this type of project?
No, it's a good question. I would have to go back in my time. I've not had direct communication with them, so I can make sure to reach back out. When I came to the city and started working on this in earnest in 2018, it was at that time clearly expressed that the company was not interested in having solar, but I think it warrants reaching back out to them. So
Okay, sure. I'd just be certainly interested to see, this has been a long time coming, and just curious if their thoughts have changed to any extent, so.
Thanks. Commissioner O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one last question, I guess. Whatever we come up with, whatever decision point we make here, it doesn't preclude any of the future stuff. That if a bigger project is feasible down the road, we'll be able to wrap in a short-term 1 or 2 megawatt system back into a 13 to 16 million, and not have any issues with that. Or if legislation changes and we can. Okay.
The only item that I would say is, I think there are differing opinions on, if you were to carve it up and have 3 different projects, you'll have some costs that you might be duplicating with interconnection perhaps, which can be an expensive cost for the different arrays. So to that extent, that's kind of this idea that if we were able to fully deploy all at once, you may be able to minimize a little bit of cost, but no, to your question, otherwise, there isn't anything that I am aware of currently that if we did 1 to 2 megawatts, then we have full ability of the remainder of the site to be looking at other projects or moving forward with other options.
So, Commissioners, just to go back to City Manager, yeah, and maybe, Allison, you can speak to this, but here's where I'm leaning towards. I'm perfectly supportive of moving forward with the behind the meter and looking at what we can do to support our own primary circuit. I think that, to me, is low-hanging fruit. I think especially with the funding for the improved infrastructure, we should move forward on that. I guess my struggle is, why would we hold off on looking at a private development instead of just kind of looking at what our options are? I look at the community solar and the anchor tenant option, both reliant on either legislative changes or working with the Service Commission and with the utility, which we've been doing for years, and we really haven't been able to move the needle. Why not just go and put out an RFI or RFQ or RFP with private development, see what we get back? And quite frankly, we may get a proposal back that makes a whole lot more sense than trying to work through a regulatory system that is not really in our favor, that is creating more barriers than encouraging a development like this to happen in the first place. I have a hard time understanding, why wouldn't we just go and do both at the same time and then see what our options are once we hear back from
One of the big items was the Solar for All funding that came out. So under current law, we can do that. So the community solar option 2 can be done one of 2 ways. One would be in partnership with Consumers Energy through their Sunrise program, which provides a path that if we were able to get that capital funding, could be built to support low-income households and disadvantaged communities. And so when that funding source was announced, that was this opportunity for a large capital investment to be able to pay for that. The second option of community solar does depend on that bill that we're waiting for action this fall. But there is still a pathway to pursue that under the existing regulatory state. And the private development and the anchor tenant options, the additional complexity there is finding others that want to come in and be partners and pay for it and have that be a part of that. So right now, the decision from staff and in conversations with Assistant City Manager was, we know we can do the behind the meter, let's just move on that. There's a desire to move forward with a project there. And then knowing that this Solar for All funding, we should know by March that an opportunity that could provide that capital needed to fully deploy the solar.
But potentially that would be only up to 5 megawatts.
And that's the clarifying point. That it's kind of I think it's a good bad. It would be, I think, quite frankly, easier if we could get funding for the whole community solar. If it is capped at 5 megawatts, we do have that opportunity then to move forward with an RFI, RFP for development of essentially 16 minus 5 minus the 1, which would be the remainder of the Butterworth that's available.
Which could still be 10 megawatts.
Right around that size.
So to me, personally, I think that would be my recommendation, is that we move forward on the behind the meter, pursue community solar if we can get the funding, and if it's, even if it's up to 5 megawatts, but then I don't see the negative impact of also pursuing the fourth option with an RFI, RFQ, or RFP. That's just where I am, unless others feel differently.
Yeah, no, I'll add, I agree with that too, and I think it's important to remember that whether it ends up being, privately developed or more of a city operation, our community is still benefiting. We're still moving towards our goal of our community being powered by renewable resources, and so I think keeping that end goal in mind is key, and so I would certainly be interested to see what a private developer could do that maybe we can't.
Yeah.
So Mayor, if I could just in terms of, if we were to have multiple strategies on the site, is what I'm hearing. If we had, as I understand it, the behind the meter would take about 5 to 10 acres, or potentially 60 acres. The community solar, if capped, at 5 acres, at 5 megawatts, then we're looking at potentially 10 to 20 acres roughly?
I believe. I got to go back and think. I think it's
Just rough.
around that.
Just hypothetically. So that means we would, for the first two, develop 15 to 30, which would leave the balance potentially 45 to 60 for private development.
I think that
Is there, I guess my point is there a way, and I think what I heard before, that what people want to propose on is some certainty. If there's a way that, as you do the exploratory, we move forward with the behind the meter for the primary circuit, but also ask for responders to potentially respond to up to 45 to 60 acres of available green space for solar development, depending on whatever, as long as we disclose that. Is there a way to make the inquiry while we move forward with the behind-the-meter approach?
Yeah, through the RFI, RFQ. That's what I was just thinking. The questions would be broad enough, and we'll be thoughtful. We can add a couple more to ensure that respondents to that RFI, RFQ that we're going to do this month would then allow for respondents if we want to do an RFP specific to the 1 to 2, or if we wanted to do an RFP more broadly for the full site. So yes, we can capitalize on that RFI and RFQ now to have the full site. And we were going to do a workshop too. The plan was for respondents to then do a workshop where we can invite developers to come on site and have the opportunity to, we really want to invite some creativity and some innovation in this space, knowing that there's a lot of opportunities, things we've pursued, but perhaps there's something that we've missed. And as Assistant City Manager Matthews has said, right, we have one time to get this right, because solar is typically a 30-year investment of something that you're going to place on the site. So we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful, and if somebody has a creative opportunity, that they have the chance to bring that forward.
Well, that would be my preference. I mean, the field itself around solar has grown and changed so dramatically since we did this back in 2014, 2015. And the conversations up until now have largely been with the city and the utilities. And we haven't had those conversations with private developers. We've had a lot of them reach out to us. I know I typically send them to you. And I agree, some probably overpromise, but there are many cities throughout this country who are working with private developers, some right here in our state, and they have had really positive working relationships and outcomes. So I would like to open it up and to hear, maybe there's some creative ideas, maybe there's some national companies that are doing this. I know there are several that have built solar on capped landfills in other states. I'd like to open it up and see what kind of feedback that we get, so that we have more options before us than just continuing the what ifs and the analysis with one party.
But definitely, just to be clear though, creating resilience for our primary circuit, so whatever the cost is, even if there's duplicated infrastructure costs in the future, makes sense, so that we can be prepared for whatever. Hopefully, we never have to experience the outage that we experienced last week with all of the traffic signals. But for those that are listening, watching, and when we had a power outage on our primary circuit, and perhaps there's ways that we can create more resilience with other alternative energy sources.
I think in closing, there were just a few things that I felt were questions that I had some quick responses to. I did want to mention the reliability is huge. There are some additional funding that's coming out in this reliability space and recognition of the disrepair of many distribution systems, and ours is one that has been identified as one of the worst performing in the country. The reliability in the backup battery only helps when you have that behind the meter. So just keep that in mind, right? That's your direct supply, because everything else goes on to the broader consumer's energy and then would rely on consumers and if there's a power outage. But to City Manager's point, there's a lot of opportunity on our primary circuit. Remember, our street lighting, traffic signals, things that are important when there's a power outage to ensure, right, that we are maintaining, as well as some of our fire stations and some opportunities there to look at expanding that from a reliability perspective. That unfortunately in the scenario that we have right now isn't something that would get to the level of supporting a homeowner, because Butterworth Solar can't directly supply a homeowner, but definitely the reliability from our primary circuit part. Did want to make note, we are also and have had conversations with the county. Of course, they have some landfills and are hoping to have some closures in that respect as well. So having conversations about, are there opportunities for, economies of scale, and if we have a number of landfills, looking at that together. So that is something that we've had conversations and continue to explore. I just wanted to note, Commissioner Asasi, in addition to Assistant City Manager mentioned CAA, I've had conversations with the Rapid and with John Ball Zoo, both with some interest in that area. So they are definitely parties that we continue to have conversations with respect to some opportunities here. And then I think the last two I just wanted to touch on, you had asked about the return on investment for residents. I do have an opportunity through a funded program with the World Resources Institute where they're going to come in and help assess what solar could we put on a home and what would that cost be, getting to that point of what would the return on investment be for a household, and are there some opportunities. There are other programs that are called Solarize. I won't go into the details, but essentially the city can help play a role in, having 30 households sign up, leverage, work with a contractor, and have it deployed to keep the costs down for a resident. We just want to make sure that it makes sense financially on that rate. And then the last part, somebody asked about other states or mentioned that this is happening in other states and is successful. I think the things that I just want to leave with are we do have enough sun, right? We get a lot of questions. If anybody asks you, hands down, we get enough sun to have successful solar installations here in the city. I do think that the two things would be, right, sometimes they have longer lasting sun in Arizona, right? So they have more hours of sun. So that just helps bring down your cost faster than what we might have. But we definitely have adequate sun here. And I do think my understanding is in other states, they do have the better credit, getting back to Commissioner O'Connor's question about what's happening. So it makes that feasible. And I have learned recently that actually the state of Illinois, you were asking about legislation, my understanding is they have passed legislation to provide tax credits for solar, similar to what the federal government has done. So installations there have proven to be more financial because folks have been able to capitalize on the federal tax incentives as well as the additional state tax incentives to start bringing down that cost as well.
Yeah, thanks. One final question, then I'm going to button this up so that we can get to the next presentation because we have Economic Development Project Team as well. Ms. Sutter, I know about a year ago there was conversation in Lansing about allowing microgrids. Is that on the table again? Do we anticipate that?
I have to go back and look. I will tell you with the current clean energy bill package, I fully analyzed there are 7 bills. It does not speak to microgrids in those 7 existing bills. My understanding, but I do intend to go back and check, is that our current framework does not allow for what is called islanding or microgridding, which would essentially allow, I'll just say a neighborhood, for example, to have solar with backup generation, that in the instance that if the consumer's grid goes down, that essentially you could turn off your tie and be an island in and of yourself to then support the electrical needs there. My understanding is that's not something that is currently allowed in the state of Michigan.
Okay, great, thanks. City Manager, is that enough direction from this body?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. So we'll proceed with the behind-the-meter approach for the primary circuit, assess what could be available for private development, but also, since we have the applications in play already for community solar, it seems like we should just continue to run that down, federal funding.
Yeah, concurrently. I don't see the need to wait. I think those can be done concurrently. And as we know more and we have a path forward potentially for community solar, we can also look at other options for the remaining site. Or it may be more viable to do one versus the other once we have all the information. Is that agreed upon, Commissioners? Are we all comfortable with that? Yes, okay.
Yep.
Mr. Matthews, anything else?
No, I think that covers the one question that I had. We're trying to be very intentional about it this time around. Doing the RFI, RFQ, as Ms. Sutter mentioned, gives us the opportunity to introduce these other ideas and conversations. So as we're pursuing Solar for All, we're also developing a roster of folks that we believe are qualified to do it if we get that opportunity. So this is really going to accelerate our understanding of the market in a way that's going to enable us moving into really the next 12 months. So.
Great, thanks. Thanks for your work on this. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to our final briefing, and hopefully we'll have a little break before we're back in here for EDPT. And that's a briefing on our fiscal year 2022 Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. Turn it over to Ms. Connie Bohach.
Good morning. And I will be brief. This is a high-level overview. We have a public hearing scheduled on September 19th for our Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. That's also called the CAPER. Oops, I got the wrong clicker here. There we go. In order for us to obtain our resources from the federal government for the Community Development Block Grant, the Home Investment Partnerships, and the Emergency Solutions Grants programs, we're required to submit 3 documents to the federal government. The first is the Consolidated Housing and Community Development Plan. That is our strategic plan to address housing and community development needs and priorities. It guides investments for those 3 programs over a 5-year period. And that's the first step. So we have a 5-year plan that identifies those strategies. And then we have to submit what's called an annual action plan. That actually is our application. And as you recall, on an annual basis, we will allocate resources through our neighborhood investment plan funding process. And those projects that we identify in that process are then included in this annual action plan. And we turn that into HUD, and that is the actual application for the period of July 1st to June 30th of that particular year. And it identifies planned projects and as well as the level of investment for those projects. And then the third thing that happens is we're required to submit the CAPER, which is the fiscal and programmatic performance information to carry out those activities during that particular year. And so it covers basically at the end of that period of performance. The resources here, so the CAPER that we are have the public hearing for covers the period of July 1 of 2022 through June 30th of 2023. And there was just over about $9.9 million in total. And by funding source, we have our traditional funds that we allocated along with some supplemental funds from the Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus Program and the Home American Rescue Plan program. Those were supplemental. And then although HUD does not require us to include the Burr Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, we do include that because we allocate that in our funding strategy. Those resources are allocated then through the Neighborhood Investment Plan. We have 8 outcomes. Those outcomes are identified priorities within that 5-year plan, and it also aligns with the city's strategic plan. So we're making investments that tie back to that 5-year plan and your overall city plan. Here identifies the funds that were awarded by outcome for that fiscal year. And again, this is the federal fiscal year of 2022, our local fiscal year of 2023, which ended June 30th of this year. And you can see that there are 3 areas that we have more resources in terms of those outcomes where we have funding. And a lot of that has to do with the regulations that are tied to those funding sources. Here's an example of our program participation in terms of how it compares to that of the Grand Rapids population based on race and ethnicity. You can see that nearly 60% of program participants are African American, with 27% Caucasian, and 13% have identified as multiracial. So you can look at that as a positive thing because we're serving the minority communities, but you can also look at that as a negative because these resources are intended to serve persons that are low mod income, and so you can also then make the assumption that we have some disproportionate statistics in regard to low mod income by race in the community. And just to give some very high-level outcomes in terms of, or accomplishments in the different outcome areas, you can see that more than 2,000 people were assisted in resolving a housing crisis, and households did receive direct financial assistance to prevent or resolve an episode of homelessness. Nearly 8,000 people received fair housing or fair housing education and legal services. And discriminatory practices were eliminated in over 1,600 housing units. Those were activities that may have involved some complaints and testing. It could have been more proactive in working with a property owner on their lease requirements to ensure that there were not discriminatory practices. So it's a variety of tools that are used through the work of the Fair Housing Center. And then increasing the supply of affordable housing. During this particular time period, 50 units were completed. That is not specifically with resources from this time period. It may have been from the previous or years where it was allocated, because our housing construction and redevelopment often takes a couple years. And so we are reporting it in the CAPER of the year that it is tied to. So there's notations in the actual document that explains that. But there were 50 units completed during this time period, and there's 212 that are underway. Here's an example of a project that was done by ICCF Community Homes. It's the Tapestry Square Senior Living. And here is an example of a single-family home ownership project completed by New Development Corporation. And this was not completed during this time. It was completed in July, but I just wanted you to see that we do multifamily and single-family. And this was such a beautiful home. We want to make sure that you got to see that. Outcome 4, there is a lot of resources that support Outcome 4. There's nearly 5,000 homes were brought into compliance with health and safety and nuisance violations. Some of those helped return vacant or abandoned properties to productive reuse. And nearly 600 homes that were owner-occupied units received minor or substantial repairs, with some of those actually receiving access modifications for physical disabilities. Outcome 5 is an area that is where our partnership with neighborhood associations comes into play, and more than 3,000 residents were educated about leadership and engagement opportunities. And over 1,000 of those individuals actually became actively involved in the community and were served on a city board. And also, there were some additional resources provided to neighborhood associations for support of the community master plan process, and that work has gone well, and they will continue that work through December 31st of this year. This is just an example of demonstrates where those housing repair programs provided services. You can see it's pretty well spread out throughout the city, and there's a concentrated area as well in terms of some specific targeting of resources from some programs. And then finally, in terms of the highlights, the safety programs, again, our partnerships primarily with neighborhood associations. You can see the work that they do in terms of trying to educate individuals about public safety topics, and also making sure that there are improvements made to properties and public spaces. Some of the SEPTED elements as well come into play here. And then we have a partnership with Family Outreach Center for mental health services that produced some pretty significant outcomes, where 97% of those who received their services reported some good outcomes in terms of improved quality of life. And then finally, improving economic opportunity. We have a variety of programs that serve adults and youth in terms of job training and job readiness supports. And Outcome 8, we did not provide any resources during this time period, because there were other resources available through the city. And the document that is submitted to the federal government is over hundreds of pages. And so I want to give a shout out to the Community Development Department staff who do a really good job of not only preparing that document that's required for the federal government, but then summarizing that information in a more public-friendly format, which is about 70-some pages long. And then they take it one step further and will put together what's called our investment report. This would be the year 2 investment report, and they summarize that down into a 10-page document. So those versions are available on our website now at grcd.info. The actual public comment period begins on September 7th and ends on September 22nd. We will take written comments through that time period, as well as the public hearing that you're hosting on the 19th. But staff were very diligent, and they actually have that information available on our website today. So anybody who wants to take a look at that, and if they come to, just give general comments, even at the meeting today in terms of public comment, we will include that in our information for the final document that gets submitted on the 25th of September. And then finally, I'd just like to put a plug in for anyone who's interested in receiving information about funding opportunity coming up for our next round of funding. The Community Development Department is hosting 2 information sessions, one on September 27th and one on September 28th. And again, that information is available on the website at grcd.info.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, we appreciate your work, the work of your department, along with all of our partners in the community that help these projects move forward and provide vital services throughout our community. So thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right, Commissioners, with that, I think I'll bring our Committee of the Whole to a close. We do have Economic Development Project Team back in here in 30 minutes, and then we'll be back together at 2 o'clock for our City Commission meeting.